Welcome back. Last time we learned about negation. The important thing to remember is that there are 3 different forms for past, future, and present negation. For past tense, just put the arms negator in front of the sentence. He did not hear. For negation in the future, we use the arms with the water sign. He will not hear. For negation in the present, we use the sejm nf form of the verb with the arms in front. He does not hear. And that's how you negate sentences in ancient Egypt. For homework, we had 3 negated sentences to translate from English to hieroglyphs. Let's look at them. The first one was, she will not go forth to the house if he does not remember the road. Okay, first we look to see the tense. It's future. So we need both the arms and the water sign as negators. Next is our verb, go forth. That's per. The she part is easy. That's our suffix pronoun folded cloth. Next, the if is understood, so nothing to add here. But the second part of our complex sentence is a different tense. It isn't future, it's present. So for the present, we have that complex situation where we need the sejm nf construction with the single negator in front of all of it. So we might as well begin with the negator arms. Now for our verb, remember. It's a bit paradoxical, but I find that students never remember the word for remember. It's secha, so let's add it. A little later, I'll suggest a way to remember this word. Now, we must use the sejm nf construction as if it were the past tense. So we add the n for the past before we add the subject he, the viper f. All that remains to complete the sentence is road, which is what? And that's, she will not go forth to the house if he does not remember the road. We had a complex negative sentence with 2 tenses, but we remembered how to do both tenses. For the first, the future, we needed both the arms and the water sign. For the second part, which was in the present, we remembered that we have to negate the verb using the sejm nf form, and we did it. Good. Now on to our second sentence. The man did not speak in the office of the scribe. Well, it's past tense, so all we need is the single negator, the arms in front of the sentence. So let's start with the arms. Now we just need to say the man speaks, because the negator will make it past tense. So we add speaks dejed and then man. In is easy. It's the owl M. Now we need office, and that's another word that people forget. It's cha. Here the lotus is the cha'a biliteral, the vulture is the phonetic complement, and the pillars with a roof and the walls is the office determinative. This is where my mnemonic device comes in, to remember both words, often forgotten. Remember and office. They're quite similar. Both involve the lotus cha, biliteral. Office is just cha, while remember has a folded cloth S in front of cha. Now for the brilliant mnemonic device. Imagine someone who believes it's impossible to have a woman president. He might say, cha, remember a woman in the office? The cha is office, and the remember is putting the woman, folded cloth she, in front of the office. Secha. Okay, I know you're thinking it's dumb, a stretch, but I bet you won't forget those 2 words. Let's finish the sentence we were working on. We were up to office, and we have to make it the scribe's office. We can just attach scribe to office, almost like a suffix pronoun. And that's, the man did not speak in the scribe's office. Good. One last sentence. Hang in there. Behold, it will not be good if she tells everything. We can start with behold, which for some reason everyone always remembers. Mech. We will see it's future tense, and we remember that we need both negators. So we add the arm and the water sign. Now, it will not be good. We can do that as a predicate adjective by putting nefer, good, up front. The if is understood. So next is she tells. That's say or speak, dejed, with the folded cloth suffix pronoun attached to it. Now we need everything. Thing is chet, and the adjective all or every follows the noun. All is neb, but adjectives agree with their nouns. Chet is feminine, since it ends in T, so all will be nebet. Now we can add everything. Chet nebet. Mek, nun nefer dejed es chet nebet. That's behold, it will not be good if she tells everything. Well done. Okay, that's it for homework. Now we will apply what we've learned to real ancient Egyptian objects. I think you're going to be pleased with how much you can do, and now that you know the basics of Middle Egyptian, it'll be easy. It's time to read some jewelry. Starting with the Old Kingdom, royal workshops produced spectacular jewelry for the kings and queens of Egypt. These high-status wearables were crafted of gold and semi-precious stones. There were no precious stones in Egypt. They were beautiful, but they had a second purpose: to protect the wearer. Visitors to museums marvel when they see the craftsmanship, but very few realize they were also texts telling a story. Some of the jewelry I'd like to show you today was discovered by Jacques de Morgan, one of the legendary excavators of the 19th century. Trained as a civil engineer and geologist, de Morgan loved archaeology. He became an Egyptologist and eventually rose to become Director General of the Egyptian Antiquity Service. De Morgan had an eye for where to dig, and during his career, he made several spectacular discoveries. The first was at Dashur. You might remember that Dashur was where Sneferu built two large pyramids, the Bent Pyramid, the only pyramid still with its white casing stones, and the Red Pyramid, where he was buried. 1,000 years after Sneferu's death, priests were still leaving offerings at Dashur for his soul. Middle Kingdom pharaohs built their pyramids at Dashur so they could share in the glory of Sneferu. De Morgan figured that although these pyramid complexes of the Middle Kingdom were far smaller than Sneferu's, they could still hold treasures. In 1894, he began to excavate. He dug a vertical shaft within the complex of Sesostris III. He's the father of Amenemhet III. After descending 30 feet, De Morgan found himself in a series of underground galleries containing the burial chambers of princesses and queens of the Middle Kingdom. The underground chambers had clearly been robbed in antiquity. The mummies were gone, taken by tomb robbers who would later strip the bodies of their treasures and jewelry. However, in a small pit, De Morgan discovered a wood box with a name inlaid in silver. The name means daughter of Hathor, with Hathor coming first for honorific import because Hathor is a goddess. Sat Hathor was the daughter of the pharaoh Sesostris II. Further in the gallery, De Morgan found another pit, again containing jewelry, this time of Merit, wife of Sesostris III. There were rings, pendants, pins, necklaces, and pectorals, all of wonderful craftsmanship. These jewels of the ladies of the court became known as the treasure of Dashur. The finds were trumpeted in British newspapers like the Illustrated London News and the Graphic. This was an era before photos could be easily reproduced, so newspapers had talented artists on staff to illustrate the discoveries. Here's De Morgan at the moment of discovering the pectorals. The beauty and richness of the jewelry captivated the public, but few knew that aside from their beauty, they told a story. Let's look at one. This is the 1895 photo of the pectoral taken soon after De Morgan discovered it. He also did an archaeological drawing, and because it's in color, it'll be easier for us to see the hieroglyphs. Queen Merit wore this pectoral around her neck. It's spectacular, isn't it? The Middle Kingdom was probably the high point of Egyptian jewelry. Let's look at the hieroglyphs in the cartouches to see who the king is. Well, the first hieroglyph is the solar disk, Re. Next, we have a water sign N. That's followed by a word we know, spelled out in full. Ma'at, truth. It's Ne Mat Re, one of the names of King Amenemhet III. Let's see what other hieroglyphs we recognize and what story they're trying to tell us. Look between the cartouches. What do you see? First tell me if it reads from right to left or left to right. We have a Nefer hieroglyph, but that can't help us determine right to left or left to right because it's a symmetrical hieroglyph. But we can tell from the Netzer sign, which means God. The text reads from right to left. What do the two hieroglyphs mean? Well, Nefer is good, so we have the good God. Let's keep reading downward. What's next? Yes, the Neb sign, which means either Lord or all. Which one? Since we just had good God, it's probably Lord. And what comes next confirms that. Those two thin lozenges are the two lands. So the king, the good God, is also Lord of the two lands, a traditional title. Now, what's under the two lands? 3 foreign land signs. And under that is another Neb sign. This time, all makes the most sense for the meaning of Neb. So Amenemhet III is Lord of the two lands, Lord of all foreign lands. You probably noticed the loaf T under the bottom Neb sign. Can you figure out why it's there? Because the word for foreign land, hast, is feminine. So, the pectoral is all about Amenemhet III. Let's find him. The two symmetrical representations of Amenemhet show him in a smiting pose. Remember when we were looking at the Narmer palette? And I said this pose would be used for centuries as the logo for both kingship and Egypt? Well, here it is, 1,000 years later. Things don't change quickly in Egypt. Amenemhet is holding a foreign enemy by the hair, and he's about to smite him with a mace, basically the rock on a stick. We can be sure the smiter is the king, not just from the pose. There are other clues. He wears a royal kilt and also a royal wig with a cobra in front. No one in ancient Egypt could miss this. It's the king. Another reason we can be sure we have the king is the Ankh hieroglyph, meaning life, with hands holding a sunshade. The sunshade is a prerogative of royalty alone. Amenemhet will not have to fight in the broiling sun. There are quite a few hieroglyphs above the king, but the central figure is the vulture goddess, Nekhbet. She's a protective deity associated with the pharaoh. Look what she holds in her talons, an Ankh hieroglyph with the Dejet hieroglyph coming out of it. She's protecting Amenemhet with life and stability. If we look above Nekhbet, we can see 2 more hieroglyphs. The Neb is easy to spot, but you have to look closely to see what the other hieroglyph is. It's the sky, Pet. The 2 hieroglyphs form her title, Mistress of the Sky. It really says Lord of the Sky. There should be a feminine loaf T under the Neb signs to make it mistress rather than Lord, but the craftsman didn't have room. On pieces like this, with limited space, there are often abbreviations. But even with limited space, there's a lot going on here, plenty of hieroglyphs. Let's look at one more area on the pectoral, just beneath the tips of Nekhbet's wings. Let's see if we can figure out what it says. I'm pretty sure that the two lozenges are the two lands. We've seen that before. The hieroglyph above the two lands is problematic. It isn't familiar, and I'm not sure what it is. If I had to bet, I would say it's a misshapen Cha hieroglyph. The one that means rise, shine, or appear. It's the sun's rays behind a hill. Remember, the son of Ramses the Great, Chaim Wasset, rising in Thebes. I think the goldsmith was given a design to execute, and he did his best. He may not have understood the hieroglyph. He may have been illiterate. So we get this strange version of the hieroglyph. If it is the Cha hieroglyph, the phrase would make perfect sense. Amenemhet is shining or rising above the two lands. I've found that artists of this period often had difficulty with the Cha hieroglyph. Let me show you a statue of Sesostris III, a pharaoh related to all the royals we've been talking about today. His name is on the statue, but even without it, we can tell it's a Middle Kingdom pharaoh. Look at that tired face. During the Middle Kingdom, pharaohs were portrayed with tired, weary faces. We really don't know why. One of Sesostris' names looked like this. It starts with the Re solar disk, again, honorific import. Next is our Cha hieroglyph. And then there are 3 Ka hieroglyphs, which together are plural of soul. They would have been pronounced Ka'u, since U is the plural ending. So the name might mean something like, the souls of Re shine. Okay, now that we know what the name should look like and what it means, let's look at the name as it is on the statue. Now look closely at the Cha hieroglyph. Where's the sun's rays behind the hill? They're not there. The sculptor has written a loaf T. He's misspelled the king's name. Again, I think this is an indication that often these craftsmen were illiterate. If our sculptor could have read, he wouldn't have made such an error. So both the carver of this statue and the goldsmith who created Meret's pectoral had trouble with the Cha hieroglyph. Now, back to our jewelry. Queen Meret's pectoral isn't just beautiful jewelry. It's propaganda. It proclaims the greatness of Amenemhet III as Lord of Upper and Lower Egypt and all foreign lands. It shows that he's protected by Nekhbet when he goes into battle, and he will be granted life and stability by the gods. The pectoral is one of the treasures of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Everyone loves it, but very few understand it. That's one reason why it's so much fun to know hieroglyphs. We can really appreciate a piece like the pectoral the same way the Egyptians did. It's think like an Egyptian. Let's look at another of De Morgan's discoveries. This pectoral was worn by Princess Sat Hathor. Let's start with the cartouche. At the top, we can see Re, the sun god. Next is the Cha hieroglyph that we were just talking about before. This time it's properly formed. On the bottom, we have the scarab beetle, Cheper. The name was pronounced Cheper Ka Re and is one of the names of Sesostris. Now, let's see what the hieroglyphs are on top of the cartouche. What do you see first? Yep, Necher or God hieroglyphs. So we have the word gods. Next, what do they rest on? Can you see what it is? It's the Hotep hieroglyph. So we can read it as, the gods are pleased, with Sesostris. Okay, what's flanking the cartouche? Unlike our other pectoral, it's not the king smiting, but I think at least one aspect of him. It is the pharaoh as Horus. We can say this because Horus is wearing the double crown, the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. The tall white crown is easy to see. but the red crown is a bit difficult. There's the front of it, and there's the distinctive curl at the front. So it is the king as Horus. But what's Horus standing on? It's the hieroglyph for gold, Nub. It's the golden Horus, one of the king's 5 names. This golden hieroglyph is a good example of how we figure out exactly what some of the hieroglyphs represent. If we look at the hieroglyph as we see it on the printed form, it isn't clear what it is. However, when we see it represented in detail in something like this pectoral, it becomes clear. We can see the bangles hanging down, the string that would have tied around the neck. This is how we figure out these things. But let's continue with the other hieroglyphs on the pectoral. Look at the upper right and left-hand corners, behind the backs of the falcons. What do we have? There are cobras with tails coiled. That's the goddess Ujat, who protects the pharaoh. That's why she's shown so often on his crown. But look at what's hanging down from the cobra's neck. An Ankh sign. She's protecting his life. So Sat-Hathor's pectoral isn't just a pretty bauble. It's a protective amulet proclaiming the king is like the golden falcon, eternal, pleasing to the gods, and his life is protected by the goddess Ujat. De Morgan's treasures of Dashur were unique at the time, and they fascinated the public. But they didn't remain unique for long. 20 years after De Morgan's find, Flinders Petrie made a similar discovery of jewelry decorated with hieroglyphs. There are some aspects of the find that are part Indiana Jones, part Night at the Museum. So let me give you some background before we translate our next piece. Flinders Petrie is everybody's favorite Egyptologist. He is credited with putting Egyptology on a scientific footing. In the early days of Egyptology, everyone, even De Morgan, was excavating primarily to find beautiful objects. Petrie was different. He was excavating for knowledge. He was the first to realize that pottery fragments, the least glamorous but most ubiquitous of objects found, were important and could be used to date an archaeological site. If one site had pots with handles but the other didn't, it was a good bet that the less fancy pots came earlier. By carefully studying the pottery he found during his excavations, Petrie was able to work out a chronological history of Egypt that was both revolutionary and useful. He was also the first to apply the new science of X-rays to mummies. Petrie was a real character who liked to do everything by himself. He built the crates he needed to ship artifacts back to England, and he even figured out how to preserve fragile beaded nets that were placed on mummies. He poured wax over them for shipping and then dissolved the wax back in England. Once, when he discovered the oldest royal jewelry ever found in Egypt, on a disarticulated arm of a mummy, he sent the arm with the bracelet on it to the authorities in Cairo. The museum curators were only interested in the jewelry and threw out the arm. Petrie said, "A museum is a dangerous place." There are endless stories about Petrie, and he's immortalized in a series of novels by Elizabeth Peters that features a female Indiana Jones, Amelia Peabody, and her husband Radcliffe Emerson, who is Flinders Petrie in thin disguise. Elizabeth Peters is a pseudonym of Barbara Mertz, a real PhD in Egyptology, so the books ring true, and real Egyptologists like De Morgan pop up every now and then. Now for Petrie's discovery. Petrie excavated for more than 70 years, and in his long career, he made many important finds. In 1914, he decided to return to Elahun, a town near Dashur where he had excavated before. During his 1889 to 1890 excavation season, Petrie had excavated the pyramid of Sesostris II. Now he wanted to excavate some of the subsidiary burials. Petrie was working with a team of excavators from the British School of Archaeology, an organization he had founded years earlier. They decided to clear the tomb as completely as possible. In one tomb, Petrie found a pink granite sarcophagus with the lid slid off by robbers. The mummy was gone. There was also a set of alabaster canopic jars intended to hold the internal organs of the deceased. The embalmers always put the organs inside these jars during mummification. As the clearing proceeded, a sharp-eyed Egyptian workman noticed that there was a recess in a wall that was packed almost to the ceiling with mud. The workman was put to work clearing the mud, and soon he found some gold beads and alerted Petrie and his assistant, Guy Brunton. Brunton now took over the clearing of the recess. For 8 days, working first with his penknife and then with a pin, he found a bead. He scraped away the mud, centimeter by centimeter, carefully recording where he found everything. As the work progressed, he found the remains of a jewelry casket. The wood had rotted away, but the casket's inlays were still embedded in the mud, and slowly the gold and ivory bits were freed from the mud. Soon he found other caskets. The chests once held all manner of objects, bracelets, necklaces, mirrors and vases that once contained cosmetics. The objects belonged to Princess Sat Hathor Unit. All the objects, painstakingly removed from the mud by Brunton, had to be cleaned and carefully reassembled, as all the threads that had once held the bracelets and necklaces together had disintegrated. When this was done, it was clear. The excavators had discovered a fabulous treasure that would go on to be known as the Treasure of Lahoun. What happened to that treasure is part of our story. Usually, such a find would stay in Egypt as a national treasure. In the old days of De Morgan and Petrie, excavators were permitted to keep a portion of their finds for their sponsoring universities or museums. But, big but, if the finds were unique, everything stayed in Egypt. That's why all of Tutankhamun's treasures, discovered by Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon, are still in Egypt. But this is where Petrie got lucky. To see how, let's examine a pectoral from the treasures of Lahoun. As you can see, it's similar to one of the pectorals we translated that was found by De Morgan. The cartouche is the same, chepe carré, and again, 2 falcons flank the cartouche, but there are differences. The falcons are not standing on the hieroglyph of gold, nub. Also, they're not wearing a double crown. On their heads are solar discs. Coiled around the discs are the tails of the cobra goddess, Ujat. And as we saw in the other pectoral, there's an Ankh hieroglyph hanging from the cobra's neck. I wouldn't be surprised if the 2 pieces were the product of the same royal workshop. They're of the same era. In the talons of the falcons is the Shen hieroglyph, the symbol of eternity. Now let's look beneath the cartouche to see what we have. It's He, the god of millions of years, holding the palm fronds, notched with all the years Pharaoh will enjoy. Behind him is the tadpole hieroglyph for 100,000. So Pharaoh will have hundreds of thousands of millions of years. This stuff is far more than just jewelry. Both De Morgan's finds and Sid Hathor Unit's jewelries are literally making statements. As we can see, the treasures found by Petrie and Brunton are quite similar to De Morgan's find. And this is where Petrie gets lucky. The Director General of the Egyptian Antiquity Service, Gaston Maspero, felt that the treasures of Lahoun were similar enough to the treasures of Dashur that he could permit Petrie to keep most of the treasure. Petrie had founded the British School of Archaeology, an independent organization. And when he received a portion of the finds at an excavation, he often sent objects to museums or donors who had financially supported his work. Petrie felt that the treasures of Lahoun were so important that they should remain together and go to the British Museum. He offered them the entire find for £8,000. But they weren't particularly interested. As Petrie reported, the answer from the British Museum to my letter was that if, when they saw the things they thought they were worth it, they might be able to put hands on a couple of thousand. A ludicrous treatment of the matter. The British Museum wasn't interested, but New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art was. So today, if you want to see the treasures of Sat Hathor Unit beautifully restored and reconstructed. Go visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art and translate some jewelry. For a fun homework assignment, let me show you Sat Hathor Unit's bracelet and ask you to translate it. Do it for next time. I'll see you then.